A man baby. Thought he could get his mommy to stop me and my husband from buying a house, and we proved him wrong in the best way possible. In our town, there was this woman named Wendy, who owned a chunk of land that was even bigger than a regular at an American diner. We're talking 40 acres of prime rural real estate, a mix of wooded areas and cleared lands, basically every redneck's wet dream. During summer weekends, there was a constant parade of vehicles down there. Everything from beat-up pickup trucks with local fishers to gleaming SUVs with out-of-state plates carrying wealthy vacationers. Me and my partner were salivating over this land, and our eyes practically popped out of our heads when we heard she was dividing it into 4 equal pieces. Obviously, one went to her daughter, who turns out to be the only normal one in this story. Another section to Smoothbrain Bradley, explanation coming soon, and she built custom houses for both of them according to their preferences. The other 2 went to herself, one for her own hours and one for a small convenience store. This is also important for later. She transferred the actual deeds to her children for their respective properties, and this decision would come back to haunt her in spectacular fashion. But in the meantime, her daughter, inarguably the one thing she got right in life, maintained her property beautifully and became a respected elementary school teacher in the nearby town, especially compared to her counterpart brother, Smoothbrain Bradley. He was the neighborhood terrorist, a 30-something man-child with zero respect for anyone. He was one of those guys who you just know peaked in high school. Everyone within earshot absolutely despised him because he'd throw these insanely loud, obnoxious parties almost every single night. There were multiple occasions where I thought the bass from his sound system would literally break glass a quarter mile away. One officer later told us they had a specific code just for Bradley's parties in their dispatch system. I guess his entitlement wasn't surprising since Mommy Dearest paid all his bills, utilities, services, everything was in her name and sent to her mailbox. Well, everything except one crucial bill, property taxes, which were in his name since he owned the property. He never bothered paying them and apparently never mentioned this to Wendy, who either forgot about them or assumed he was handling it like any normal adult would. But of course, for Smoothbrain Bradley, it was still a surprise when the police showed up at his house one day with an eviction notice. The rumor about it spread quickly, and very soon, everyone in the town got a surprise too. We never saw Smoothbrain Bradley again. It was our town's mystery, until we found out that instead of some elaborate reason, he'd simply been arrested during a bar fight in town. His house even went up for auction. Hooray. But the place looked like a crime scene. It was completely trashed with holes punched through walls. There was even a massive hole in the living room floor dropping straight into the basement. The carpet had multiple stains from mysterious liquids and solids, rot and black mold all over the walls. His partying habits had left the house in what banks classified as uninhabitable condition, meaning only cash buyers could touch it. This is where our man Magic Mark comes in. He was known for buying these disaster houses at auction for cheap, fixing them up, and putting them back on the market. And long story short, it was beautiful. Only had a few months left of renovation before it became our dream home. But 2 weeks later, I got the call. It was Mark. His voice sounded tight with worry as he explained that his sister had fallen ill in another state, and he wanted to be with her instead of completing the house. I swear me and my husband almost came close to straight up ending the life of Smoothbrain Bradley. She raised me after our parents died, he explained, and now she needs me. He explained it wasn't up to code yet, but if we could find financing, he'd sell it to us for a reasonable price, significantly less than what he'd planned to list it for when finished. We eagerly agreed and started hunting for a bank. Through a realtor friend, we found a bank willing to loan us money with the condition that we'd bring the house up to code within 2 weeks or they could foreclose. It was intimidating, but we were young, energetic, and naive enough to think we could handle it. Mark offered to help by explaining exactly what needed to be done to meet minimum requirements. He couldn't do the work himself since he was in a rush to get to his sister, but he gave us detailed instructions on what was needed, how much time and money it would take, and even recommended local suppliers who would give us fair prices. He even helped financially. We took out a loan for twice what he wanted for the house, and he returned half the money to us for repairs. It was an unusual arrangement, but it worked out perfectly for everyone involved. After all the work he'd already done, the house was surprisingly close to meeting code. Most of what remained was finishing work, installing bathroom fixtures, completing electrical outlets, adding smoke detectors, and a few other safety items. We called in some friends to help and got it done in half the time the bank had given us. We spent several more months replacing flooring, rewiring, patching walls, and tearing off this disgusting ancient wallpaper that was literally decomposing on the drywall. The previous renovations that Bradley had completed were shockingly bad. We found electrical wires hanging unconnected inside walls, plumbing that went nowhere, and load-bearing beams that had been partially cut through. Finally, our dream home was ready to move into. It still had some issues we'd fix over time, but we could officially call it ours. We weren't even fully moved in when Wendy showed up to welcome us. She appeared one Saturday morning as we were unloading boxes from our U-Haul, a woman in her late 50s with perfectly styled hair and designer clothes that seemed wildly impractical for country living. Mark had repeatedly warned us about her entitled attitude, but initially she seemed perfectly pleasant. She brought over a basket of muffins, store-bought, not homemade, and made small talk about the neighborhood. Then right as our conversation was wrapping up, she dropped the bomb. "I hate to tell you this, but this house actually belongs to me," she said with fake sympathy, her smile never reaching her eyes. "You've been scammed, and I feel terrible for you, but you have 30 days to get out. The previous owner had no right to sell it to you." My heart literally skipped a beat. My partner froze beside me, a box of kitchen utensils in his arms. We'd heard horror stories about property scams before, so we were absolutely terrified. All that time, money, and effort into our dream house, and now this woman was telling us we'd lose everything. We tried to keep our expressions neutral, but I'm sure the blood had drained from our faces. We thanked her for being so nice about it and said we'd talk to the bank and Mark to figure things out. She nodded sympathetically, telling us she hoped we hadn't lost too much money and that she was just trying to protect what's hers. As she walked away, I noticed she was wearing Louboutin shoes, hardly appropriate for the gravel driveway, and my growing suspicion was confirmed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a wealthy, entitled woman who thought she could intimidate us. That's exactly what we did. The bank confirmed Mark was the legitimate deed holder. Our realtor confirmed the same thing. Mark explained that Wendy had accused him of stealing the house multiple times after he bought it at auction and had constantly harassed him during renovations. "She even threatened to sue me," he said during our call. But her lawyer must have told her she had no case since she never actually filed anything. We even went to the courthouse ourselves to verify our names were on the deed. The clerk recognized the address immediately. "Oh, the party house," she said with an eye roll. "Thank goodness that nightmare is over." During this process, several neighbors filled us in on Bradley's backstory, each adding more details to the picture we were forming. When Wendy came back asking when we'd be moving out, we firmly explained it would never happen since we legally owned the property. We said we understood it must be hard to lose her family property due to her son's negligence, but that wasn't our problem, and we weren't giving up a house we bought with our hard-earned money and worked so hard to renovate. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up in surprise. She clearly hadn't expected resistance from a young couple. Realizing we knew the situation, Wendy switched to a sob story about how the property had been in her family for generations. A lie we later discovered. She'd bought it 20 years ago, and how Mark had stolen it while they were dealing with her son's arrest. She dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. When we asked why they didn't just bid on the house at auction themselves, especially since we'd bought it from Mark for only $50,000, which was still giving him a small profit after his work, she huffed that she refused to pay for something that rightfully belonged to her family. The entitlement was breathtaking. We apologized again but explained we weren't taking a loss on the property, especially after all our time, effort, and money. However, trying to be decent neighbors, we offered to sell the house to her for $100,000, which was still just over half its market value. Considering we paid $50,000 and put in another $30,000 in materials plus months of labor, we thought that was extremely fair. Honestly, we would have accepted $90,000 if she'd tried negotiating. Instead, she countered with $40,000, saying she shouldn't have to pay anything for something that rightfully belongs to her. Her voice had an edge now, the friendly facade cracking. When we said that was way too low, she said she understood our efforts and would generously offer $50,000 total, including $10,000 for our renovations. She acted like she was doing us a huge favor. When we told her $50,000 was just what we paid Mark for the house itself, before any renovations, she exploded, calling us liars and thieves and saying the house was a complete dump that couldn't possibly be worth that much. Her perfectly composed demeanor vanished, replaced by red-faced fury. After she called our dream home, the one we'd poured our blood, sweat, tears, and savings into, a dump, we were done. We asked her to leave and told her we'd never sell to her even if she offered double the market value. She stormed out hurling insults, her designer heels crunching angrily on our gravel driveway, and later we discovered she was spreading vicious rumors throughout the neighborhood claiming we'd stolen her house, were running a drug operation, and even that we were part of a satanic cult. This last one was so ridiculous it actually made us laugh. We initially ignored the rumors, thinking nobody would believe such nonsense. We focused on finishing our move-in and getting our house set up. Then one day, a large bearded guy we'd never met pulled into our driveway with a gun visible in his holster demanding we get out now. My partner and I were planting a vegetable garden, and we both froze, trowels in hand, utterly terrified for a second. We'd heard about him. He considered himself the neighborhood's unofficial peacekeeper, confronting anyone causing problems. The locals called him sheriff, despite having no actual law enforcement credentials. He was a former military guy who'd moved back to take care of his aging parents and stayed after they passed. Most neighbors actually liked him, saying he was reasonable, and in our rural area where law enforcement is distant, it can take deputies 30+ minutes to respond to calls. People appreciated his presence. For context, our neighborhood has two main sections, one filled with nice retired folks where everyone gets along, with well-maintained homes and beautiful gardens, and another section deeper in the woods with some less law-abiding citizens. We live on the edge of the peaceful part, separated from the rougher area by about a mile of woods and farmland. Having heard about this guy before, we decided to test our assumption about who he was. We invited him in for a beer and a chat, saying he could bring his gun, but we'd be bringing ours too. Almost everyone around here has firearms. There are more gun shops than dollar stores, so him having a weapon wasn't alarming. It's just a way of saying, I can defend myself if needed. He never pointed it at us, just had it holstered. He accepted our invitation with a curt nod, following us into our kitchen where we cracked open some local craft beers. After a few hours of explaining the situation, showing him our deed and paperwork, and sharing what we knew about Wendy and Bradley's history, he apologized for the misunderstanding. His entire demeanor changed, the stern, intimidating facade melting into a friendly, if gruff, neighbor. He admitted he'd gotten caught up in the rumors and reacted hastily. That woman can be mighty convincing, he said, shaking his head. He even thanked us for buying the house, saying everyone was happier with Bradley gone. No more complaints about loud music or drunk teenagers stumbling down the middle of the road at 2 a.m. Before leaving, he promised to set the record straight with other neighbors, which he apparently did, because the most outlandish rumors stopped circulating almost immediately. Now for why the peacekeeper believed Wendy's rumors so easily, which became a major turning point when everything started unraveling for her. This part overlaps a bit with later events, but here goes. Remember that convenience store Wendy built on 1/4 of her property? It was a small but well-stocked shop with essential groceries, fishing supplies, bait, beer, cigarettes, and all the other basics rural communities need. It was incredibly popular in the neighborhood, not because of good prices, they actually overcharged for everything, or customer service, which consisted of an occasional thanks for your purchase if you were lucky, and more often involved Wendy sighing dramatically if you took too long to count your change. They would give refunds if you found mold on food, which I guess counts for something, though they'd make you feel like you were committing a crime by asking. No, people shopped there because it was the only store for miles. If you needed groceries and didn't want to drive all the way to town, a good 25-minute journey on winding country roads, they were conveniently located. Despite our issues with Wendy, even we shopped there occasionally since they were literally next door, and the alternative was a significant time investment. The store's popularity gave Wendy significant influence in the neighborhood. Everyone wanted to keep their convenient little shop, and she had built quite a positive reputation through strategic donations to local events and occasional favors for elderly neighbors. So when she started spreading rumors, people listened. The absurd claim about us stealing her house eventually blew over because it was ridiculous, but people believed her other, pettier rumors. Neighbors avoided us, not wanting to get on Wendy's bad side and risk being banned from her store, which she had done to others in the past for perceived slights. They ignored us and left us alone. A few years later, Bradley was released from prison. We learned from the grapevine that his original sentence had been reduced for good behavior, which seemed hard to believe given his history. With nowhere to go, Wendy let him move into an apartment above her convenience store, forbidding any wild parties on her property. He didn't pay rent, he just had to run the store when she was busy with other things, which increasingly meant whenever she felt like it. But Bradley hadn't learned his lesson. While working the register, he would regularly double charge customers and pocket the extra money. Sometimes he'd scan items twice, other times he'd manually enter higher prices than what was marked. We noticed this pattern multiple times and initially went back for refunds, always getting the excuse that the register was broken. Eventually, we brought this to Wendy's attention, thinking she might want to know her son was doing something so obviously illegal that could jeopardize her business license. Instead of thanking us, she dismissed our concerns with a wave of her manicured hand and basically told us to mind our own business. My son would never do such a thing, she said coldly. Perhaps you should check your bank statements more carefully before making accusations. So we did exactly that, and shared this information with the few neighborhood friends we'd finally made after years of effort. They thanked us, but admitted they didn't believe it, suggesting we might have misunderstood or that it really could be register errors. Word spread quickly, though, and soon the peacekeeper showed up at our house again. This time he was friendlier, having learned to ignore most rumors about us. He warned us to stop spreading rumors about the store, saying he'd already spoken with Wendy and Bradley, who claimed it was just register malfunctions. He made it clear we'd have problems if we continued, suggesting we were just trying to get revenge on Wendy. I understand you folks don't get along, he said, but trying to hurt her business isn't right. We wanted to show him proof, but knew he probably wouldn't believe us. He really liked Wendy and generally took her word over ours. So we apologized and decided to stop shopping there unless absolutely necessary. We started making weekly trips to the grocery store in town, stocking up on essentials to avoid emergency purchases from Wendy's store. Everything changed a couple years later. After our warning and the spreading rumors, people started checking their receipts more carefully and noticed the same pattern we had. Some even compared receipts for identical purchases on different days, finding dramatic price differences. Bradley had probably pocketed tens of thousands of dollars, and Wendy clearly knew about it but chose to silence complaints with counter rumors. The thing about small country stores like that, they depend entirely on regular local customers. During vacation season, they make good money from tourists buying overpriced bait and sunscreen, but not enough to sustain themselves through winter without local support. The seasonal nature of lake tourism meant at least 7 months of relying almost exclusively on regulars. Then the peacekeeper finally connected the dots, and wow, was he furious. We could hear him cursing out Bradley and Wendy from our house, his booming voice carrying clearly across the property line. That same day, he went door to door letting everyone know exactly what they were doing, carrying a stack of receipts as evidence. And if anyone in the neighborhood was trusted more than Wendy, it was him. His military background and no-nonsense reputation gave his words significant weight. Within 24 hours, he completely destroyed their business. Everyone locally stopped coming. They still did okay during summer with tourists who didn't know better. But when winter came and those crowds disappeared, they started hemorrhaging money. After 2 winters, they were forced to close for the winter months, which meant throwing away most of their inventory each fall and buying fresh stock each spring. After 3 more years of this unsustainable cycle, they permanently closed. That's when their neighborhood reputation truly collapsed, and people finally started respecting us. We could make friends without extraordinary effort, and neighbors stopped treating us like we had the plague. We were invited to community barbecues and fishing tournaments. People would wave as they drove past instead of pointedly looking away. Unfortunately, there's more background needed before we reach the climax. Wendy is incredibly nosy. We can't even step outside without her watching our every move through her window or suddenly finding a reason to be outside too, whether it's walking her dog or pulling weeds or whatever excuse she invents. If we're in our yard, she's guaranteed to be outside as well, often staring openly or pretending to be engaged in some activity while clearly observing us. One memorable incident involved my partner working shirtless on a hot day, installing a new mailbox post. Wendy suddenly appeared and spent nearly an hour weeding the same 3-foot section of her garden directly across from where he was working. The temperature was over 90 degrees, yet she stayed out there in full makeup, occasionally making comments just loud enough for us to hear about inappropriate behavior. We have nothing to hide, but given our history, we don't appreciate being constantly watched. We planned to install a small above-ground pool and hot tub and really didn't want an audience while relaxing in swimwear, so we started looking into privacy fencing. Nothing fancy, just a standard 6-foot wooden fence along the property line we shared with Wendy. Trying to be neighborly, we informed Wendy we'd be putting up a fence. She immediately objected, claiming it would ruin the aesthetic of the neighborhood and block her view, though the only view it would block was of our yard. We clarified that we would be putting up a privacy fence regardless of her objections, as was our right. Still wanting to maintain civility, we offered to discuss details like color and design, so she wouldn't have to stare at something she found unattractive, given that staring at our property seemed to be her favorite hobby. I don't want to look at a fence at all, she said firmly. This neighborhood has always had open yards, and that's how it should stay. To avoid disputes about placement, we planned to set the fence a foot inside our property line. We went to the courthouse and paid for a copy of our deed with the property map, and were shocked to discover that Wendy was claiming about 1/3 of our land. She had a small shed and even a garden on it. According to the property records, our lot was nearly twice the size we'd been using. There's a line of trees running through our irregularly shaped property. Weird property lines are common here due to how land was originally divided among settlers. According to our deed and property map, there's a triangular section of our land beyond these trees, but Wendy was treating everything past the tree line as hers. She'd even installed a small decorative fence along what she claimed was the boundary, something we'd never questioned until now. When we brought this up, showing her a copy of the property map, she completely freaked out, again calling us liars and thieves. "That's my garden, my land," she shrieked, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "I've been using it for 20 years. We didn't really care about this section since we'd lived here for years thinking it was actually hers." To make things easier, we offered to sell it to her, or even trade for a portion of her property that would be more convenient for us to maintain. She flatly refused, insisting she wouldn't pay for something that already belonged to her, and wouldn't give us her property for nothing after we'd already stolen from her. Since then, we've had an ongoing property dispute. In our rural area, property lines are often complicated. Many deeds are centuries old and use temporary landmarks like large oak tree to large rock beside stream instead of precise measurements. These landmarks might be describing multiple features or might have disappeared 100 years ago. The original surveys were done with primitive equipment, and subsequent transfers sometimes created overlapping claims. Property disputes are so common here that our state has created extremely strict laws governing them, especially regarding surveyors. Just a few years ago, a landowner won a dispute against a major corporation over just 0.1 acres, costing the company and earning him over $1 million. The corporation had built part of a warehouse on his land, believing their survey was correct, but the court sided with the homeowner. Our property lines should have been straightforward since Wendy created them herself fairly recently when subdividing her land, but the strict surveyor laws still apply. Basically, if a surveyor gives incorrect measurements, even by honest mistake, they face hefty fines, lose their license permanently, and must notify and refund all clients from the past decade. Those clients can then request new surveys at the original surveyor's expense. If the surveyor wasn't accepting bribes, previous clients can sue for damages caused by incorrect property lines. If bribery was involved, all damages and fees fall on whoever did the bribing. This makes surveyors extremely reluctant to get involved in anything resembling a property dispute. They'll typically refuse such jobs outright or charge astronomical rates to offset the potential risk. So when our dispute emerged, it wasn't as simple as calling someone out to verify clarify the boundaries. Before we could find a surveyor, Wendy found one first, and I suspect she influenced them somehow because they marked the property line exactly as she described, except for one part she didn't like. Apparently, our property extends to about a foot from her house, which was fun to discover, though nowhere near the section she was trying to claim from us. When that particular measurement came up, she actually tried to physically block the surveyor from continuing, claiming he was trespassing on her land. The poor man looked utterly confused as she contradicted herself in real time. Now, whenever we try to find a surveyor, Wendy accidentally introduces herself and casually mentions she already had her portion surveyed, dropping hints about a dispute. This immediately scares them off. Oh, and did I mention the markers from the bank's surveyor when we bought the property mysteriously disappeared before we moved in? Wonder how that happened. At this point, hiring a surveyor would cost us as much as that disputed land is worth, maybe more. Those willing to consider it give ridiculous quotes. We're talking $15,000 plus for what should be a $2,000 job, because they're essentially risking their careers. We're saving up anyway, on principle. A few months ago, a severe storm hit our area and knocked down a large tree on the disputed property. This wasn't just any tree. It was a massive oak, probably 100 years old, with a trunk nearly 4 feet in diameter. This tree was right beside the road, and when it fell, it damaged our neighbor's property across the street and completely totaled someone's brand new sports car as they drove by. We're talking about a high-end European vehicle. I won't name the brand, but think Italian and very expensive. Thankfully, nobody was injured, but cleanup took several days, involving multiple crews with heavy equipment. Just enough time for us to receive a bill in the mail for over $200,000, literally more than our entire property was worth after renovation. My heart nearly stopped when I opened that envelope. The itemized costs included the car's replacement value, towing fees, road repair, utility line restoration, it had taken down a telephone pole, and legal fees. For those who don't know, most home insurance doesn't cover damage to other people's property. That's on you. And if your property damages something on public land, like a road, when you could have reasonably prevented it, like removing a dangerous tree, you're completely responsible for damages where we live. The letter claimed the tree had visible rot and should have been removed years ago as a hazard. When we received this massive bill from some rich person's insurance company for their totaled sports car, we called them and politely explained the tree wasn't on our property. The agent sounded skeptical but professional. They asked some questions about property boundaries and said they'd investigate further before pursuing payment. About a week later, we received another letter with a copy of the deed and property map, with the tree circled in red, showing it was clearly on our property according to county records. They demanded full payment within 30 days of their first notice or they'd take us to court. The letter included phrases like willful negligence and clear liability, making it sound like we were completely doomed. We called again and explained it wasn't our property, that while the official records showed it on our land, there was an ongoing dispute, and our neighbor had been actively preventing us from accessing that portion of the property for years. The agent sighed heavily, clearly tired of excuses. He argued that anyone with eyes could see the tree was on our land, and that even if the property map was slightly off, it couldn't possibly be wrong by that much. Look, he said impatiently, I understand nobody wants to pay for this, but the tree was clearly on your property, and you're legally responsible. If you're having a dispute with your neighbor, that's between you two, but it doesn't change your liability. We simply gave them Wendy's surveyor's contact information and explained that she had been claiming and maintaining that land for years. The agent sighed again, saying they'd investigate further, but reminded us we had about 2 weeks to pay if our claim couldn't be verified. His tone suggested he thought we were just trying to weasel out of paying. We never heard from them again. Obviously, the surveyor wasn't about to contradict his previous work. No bribe would be worth losing his license, refunding a decade of work, and facing potential lawsuits. We were on pins and needles the entire time, worrying we might be sued or that our wages could be garnished for a debt we couldn't possibly pay. We called the insurance company later to check on the situation. The agent sounded quite pleased while reading the notes. Ah yes, this case, he said, his tone much warmer than during our previous calls. Due to confidentiality, they couldn't share much, but confirmed Wendy had disputed our claim, insisting the property wasn't hers, exactly as we expected. The surveyor she hired had confirmed his original results, showing the tree was indeed within the boundary she claimed as hers. Since we weren't contesting the survey and the surveyor was hired by Wendy herself, the insurance company had no reason to doubt the results. The full responsibility for all damages fell on Wendy. The agent did share one tidbit that made our day. She was quite upset about our determination, he said, clearly enjoying the memory. She insisted the tree was on your property despite what her own surveyor said. Quite a peculiar position to take. Wendy obviously wasn't happy about paying, though she apparently had enough savings to cover it without selling more land. According to another neighbor, she'd been gradually selling off portions of her original property over the years to fund her lifestyle, so she still had considerable assets despite the expensive settlement. We've stayed quiet about the property dispute since then, though we're still considering saving for a surveyor to reclaim our land. At this point, it's more about principle than the actual property. We rarely use our backyard anyway, preferring our front porch with its view of the sunset over the distant hills. Whenever Wendy looks at us now, she's clearly furious. Her once perfect composure has deteriorated. Her hair isn't always perfectly styled anymore, and she often looks tired and bitter. Ironically, she seems upset that we let her have our land, which resulted in her massive bill. It's free land. How can she complain? But I suspect in her mind, we somehow tricked her into claiming land that would later cost her dearly. At this point, any rumors she might spread would backfire since we've befriended much of the neighborhood, and nobody trusts her anymore after discovering Bradley was stealing from everyone with her knowledge. The peacekeeper has become one of our closest friends, often stopping by for coffee on Sunday mornings to share neighborhood gossip. She's stuck between a rock and a hard place, and we're just sitting back watching the fires she started to consume her life. The convenience store sits empty now, its windows covered with brown paper. Bradley has apparently moved to another state. No one knows exactly where. Wendy still lives in her house, but she's become increasingly reclusive. Can't wait for the next chapter. While planning our privacy fence, we installed an invisible dog fence, an underground wire that triggers a beeping collar when dogs approach the boundary. If they continue, it delivers a mild shock. We don't believe in shock collars, so we tested it ourselves first. It was just a tingly sensation, not painful, like touching a doorknob after shuffling across carpet and socks. We spent a weekend digging a shallow trench around our property, carefully laying the wire, and training our 2 rescue dogs, a German Shepherd mix and a smaller terrier, to respect the new boundaries. We placed the wire well within our property, partly because it wasn't very long and partly to keep our dogs far from Wendy's land, We didn't want any accusations about our pets damaging her precious garden. Apparently, Wendy thought we were marking where we wanted our privacy fence, because she deliberately ran over it with her lawnmower, even though it was 5 feet past what she claimed as her property line. We watched from our kitchen window as she deliberately steered her riding mower off her usual path to drive directly over the freshly disturbed earth where we'd buried the wire. We all learned that day that electric lawnmowers and electrified wires don't mix. Her mower was completely fried, every electrical component ruined. The motor made a horrible grinding noise, then sparked dramatically before dying completely. Wendy sat there in shock, no pun intended, for several minutes before stomping back to her house. She had to buy a brand new one just because she wanted to be petty and destroy our markers. The best part? Since it was so far onto what even she acknowledged as our property, she couldn't even try blaming us. She still attempted to spread rumors, but they went nowhere. It would have been too ridiculous even for those who still tolerated her. She never even asked us to replace her mower. I guess she knew exactly how that conversation would go. Hope you enjoyed this saga. I've got another story coming about how my mother's malicious compliance cost her company over $100 million and got her entire department permanently shut down. But that's for another day.